Welcome, Ramy.
Welcome, David. Welcome, Mishti.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I think you haven't officially met Mishti before, right? Because this is your first lunch break.
Oh yeah.
It is my first time. It is my first time we meet.
So yes. Mishti and I co-host this every day, and it's basically we show up on the web and talk to interesting people, whether it's investors or founders, or we read Twitter together if there's nobody who drops by. So then we we share links and just kind of have fun and read stuff together. So it's it's what we're up to.
Very cool. Yeah. Well, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and I think I was gonna say I should tell Mishti a little bit of our backstory because we could also do a little bit. I think we've known each other maybe over a decade, probably, right? Or maybe about a decade, I think.
I think 10 years exactly, David. I think probably we met around 2010 or 2011 because I was getting started with Snippet for sure. But we might have met right before.
Right. And I was telling Mishti a little bit about Snippet because it's like very relevant.
I read a little bit about it online and the origin story kind of after around that time of the Arab Spring, people sharing things. Super interesting. Yeah. And we've been talking about the topic of like curating the internet and things for a while. So definitely like always comes up on lunch break.
Yeah, it's a great topic of passion of mine as well. So I'm excited.
Yeah.
So I think we were each living in Noe at the time, right? And I think
I still live in Noe.
Still? Oh, same spot?
Yeah, I have had the same rent-controlled apartment for 11 years.
Oh,
that's amazing.
You pay $2 a month, and
no.
We're in the Presidio now, so not too far. I still make it out to Noe a bunch. It's one of my favorite spots in the city.
And where do you live, Mishti?
I am in Hawaii right now.
And which part?
I'm on the North Shore of Oahu.
On the North Shore. Okay, that's way cooler.
Awesome. I just moved here. When I first came here, I was on the South Shore, but then I was like, no, gotta go hang out with the cool surfers up there.
No, the North Shore is like, I don't think, like every time I go to the North Shore, I'm like, wow, I'm just not that cool. I it's funny, like I go to Burning Man and I feel like I could fit in, but I go to the North Shore, I'm like, there's no hope. There's no hope.
Maybe now I feel like some like tech people are trickling in, but
no, it's not just tech. It's like I need to lose about 50 pounds and like just be cooler. It's a lost cause.
It is funny who you run into here. Like 2 days ago, I actually like cut my leg while surfing, so I had to go in. But I just barely missed Jack Johnson surfing there by like a few minutes. And these kind of like surf celebrities / musicians or like Instagram personalities just sort of like walk around and go to the same breaks all the time and stuff. So it's a fun place, yeah.
That's great. And so, Ramy, are you you've either made major improvements to your rent-controlled apartment? It doesn't look how I recall seeing it last. So
no, I'm in Napa right now.
Oh yeah, okay.
Oh, nice. That's really nice.
What is that? Kind of just a little spring vacation kind of thing?
Yeah. We started spending a lot of time here, my wife and I, during COVID, and we recognized that it's just an hour from San Francisco, but you get real summers.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And also, it's better for the environment. So instead of having to ship the wine all the way from Napa to San Francisco to drink it, I could just like drink it.
Yes.
Farm to table.
That's great.
That's right.
Have you been going out to a lot of the restaurants in Napa?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, we try to be here like on weekends. Just that I ended up coming a little bit earlier this weekend.
Yeah, we went maybe like I want to say like a month ago. We went and we were really impressed with, I think we drive through every once in a while, but we haven't really spent a lot of time. And we were really impressed with like all of the restaurants, how they have set up like blocked off streets, big tents. They have a lot of like the outdoor dining stuff was really dialed in and on point.
The weather is more conducive. It's a Republican stronghold, actually. So
interesting.
And sadly,
Napa is. Yeah, Napa's a Republican stronghold.
Napa was the last base for the KKK in Northern California, actually.
Really? Whoa.
Yeah, it's a very conservative. It's a very, very conservative place.
Is that to do just because of agriculture kind of is like that, or?
I think so. I think it's a very, it's definitely a unique place. And so, because you don't get that in the Bay Area. Like, you leave San Francisco and you go to Stanford, and it's still pretty much the same mindset. And you assume that the only way to see sort of the conservative side of California is to go like East LA or Central Valley or something. But no, it's a 50-minute drive from San Francisco, and it's a pretty conservative
You
place.
kind of pick that up in your daily interactions, or is it more, thinking about like town policies and things like that it comes up? Because, I mean, we always talk about like echo chambers in real life and online. And I think everyone kind of agrees with this ideal that you should try to escape your chamber and engage with people who really disagree with your views. But in practice, I think it's like very rare or, impossible for some people to really do that.
No, I like, to me, it's part of sort of an American ideal. That freedom of speech. I wasn't raised here. I grew up in Egypt, and Egypt obviously at the time had it wasn't like a super repressive place, but there are certain topics you couldn't talk about, like religion or government, for the most part, or sex. I guess you can talk about any of the three in the U.S. either, but for the most part, and I think for me coming to the U.S. and realizing, wow, there's actually an opportunity for people to express themselves and to dissent. You have an obligation to dissent. That was a wonderful thing. Yeah. And I would say what I have been actually most surprised about, and even when I was in college, I went to my high school in Canada and college at Harvard, there was always just freedom of speech, like different opinions and different thoughts and different ideas. And it was a very lively debate. My roommate was the head of the Palestinian group, and I was friends with the head of the Israeli group, and they would have these debates and like massive disagreements, but also like, but there was just like very healthy tension of contrast of ideas. It's totally lacking in Silicon Valley. It's hilarious. It is just such a echo chamber of of ideas and buzzwords and people doing lip service for things. And after a while, it's also, I think, not only I think it's the state. I think it's bad on a number of fronts. One of which is just the impact to innovation. Mm-hmm. Like, we can't assume that every consumer out there is a left of center consumer. That's just not how things are. And we can't also, it also affects us negatively because we end up, I think, sometimes talking a lot about buzzwords so much that we end up, you get a lot of really smart talents fixated on things that actually aren't useful. But we have framed them as, it's the next big thing, or it's, or it's a great way to make money, or a great way to have impact, or whatever lexicon you're using. And in reality, it's just like, I'm not sure there's a there there.
Is there anyone in particular that sort of you think is overblown, or?
Well, I mean, it depends on the year. I started in venture capital in 2009. At the time, the hottest things was biofuels, which is really funny because we're almost back full circle, not quite. But from biofuels, the next hot thing was IoT. It was like your fridge is going to talk to your microwave and order milk, and it's going to somehow change your life. That didn't go very far. Then Google came up with the Google Glass, and when that happened, it became AR, VR. We were going to all walk around with virtual reality and augmented reality, and the only application that came out of it is Pokemon Go, which is great. Like, that was about it. And then you moved from AR, VR. I think the next hot thing after was 3D printing. The fucking dumbest 3D printing, really? Like, and it's funny because 3D printing to me was so random because I could never really feel what is exactly the application. Oh, you could imagine if you wanted to print this at home and you could print this cup. Well, who wants to print a cup at home? I don't. What I mean, if you want to print 1,000 of these, you just do that in China. It's pretty ineffective. You just 3D model it and you'll get it for 15 cents a piece. If you want to do one, and you're like, well, imagine like how much it's going to totally change the gifting. And I think what was interesting about 3D printing, I think it struck a nerve with engineers from the 80s and 90s of like sort of that tinkerer, hardware person that just like somehow they thought this was the future. It went nowhere, but it's hilarious. Anyways, from 3D printing to, it's funny because I was visiting University of Indiana a couple of years ago, and somebody donated like $10 million for a 3D printing center back in 2015, but it took them 3 years to open it. So they were opening it in 2018. At that point, nobody cared about 3D printing anymore. It was like that ship had sailed. But anyways, after 3D printing, obviously there was the first wave of crypto. 2017, like 20, that's when David started Curious Conversations. And again, then there was a very clear application of Bitcoin around regulatory arbitrage, but everybody was like, oh, all of these other, imagine if we tied stablecoin, because a stablecoin wouldn't allow you to transact. Well, we don't know if people want to transact. I mean, people are using, or another example was like, oh, imagine if we're going to have smart contracts. I don't know if people want smart contracts. It's great in theory, but we don't know if people want those things. Right. Anyways, and then but then the challenge with cryptocurrency, it was just so abstract. Like nobody really understood what especially the blockchain. Like people understood what Bitcoin is, but you talk about the blockchain, and all of this is really just a database with active replication, effectively, which has been around for like 25 years, but slightly different. And like, sure, there's only one database. And anyways, so then it was so abstract that the pendulum swung all the way to the other and became scooters. So the hottest thing in 2018 were scooters, which made no sense. Like, oh my God, it's going to totally upend mobility. Like scooters are going to be the next everything. And I'm sorry?
No, I'm just laughing because I forgot that was such a thing.
They're really perfect in Santa Monica. Like if you have 72 and sunny every day, it's like amazing.
Scooters is made for Santa Monica, where you are a tech worker wearing shorts and flip flops or running shoes. It is not sweaty and it's not too cold, and it's about 5 miles to work.
You've got a bunch of you've got a row several blocks long of all of these amazing restaurants all lined up. You're not driving to like a suburban strip mall to get Applebee's or whatever.
Parking is very hard in Santa Monica. It's perfect.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then scooters obviously was way too up. So now, what is hot right now? No code is really hot. Like, but sure, the future is like, oh my God, imagine if like no code this, no code that. Mm-hmm. Video conferencing is really hot, obviously. Some elements of basically Robinhood for X and Robinhood for Y, and like individual trading and the power of the people to upend financial industries is really hot. But I think when you look at it, was all of these, they follow traditional hype curve pattern. The trigger for hype, I think, boils down to what, at least in tech, boils down to one of two things: a big exit or a technology trigger. Right. Ultimately, that's where all of these come things. Like, and sometimes it's both. For AR, VR, for example, Oculus. Microsoft acquired Oculus, so now, and smart engineers are drawn, let's build the next Oculus. Well, it was a mistake, guys. Mark Zuckerberg had acquired WhatsApp and Instagram, so he got a free rein to a $2 billion useless acquisition. It's fine. People do that. And, his other two will more than pay for themselves. Or, or with scooters, I think it was sort of trying to find the next Uber. It was ultimately where it was coming from. Uber had really upended mobility and transportation, and we were like trying to find, what is the next thing? Maybe it's bicycles, maybe it's motorcycles. Turns out it's just Uber. That was it.
And so how do you, when you're sort of, these are all examples we're looking at from the past, and I think it can be instructive to look at the past, but then if you want to try to contextualize it to be useful for the present, how do you look at the present and see it more clearly?
Oh, the key is exactly to do that, David, to look at the present instead of trying to predict the future. I couldn't agree. I realize, so to me, whatever is the hype word is a buzzword in TechCrunch. We don't do it in Seed. Just run away from it, because there is high valuations, even though there's a lot of talent, but there's also most of the time unproven consumer demand. And predicting how consumers will respond it's very hard. Instead, I try very hard to look at real applications or real trends. One way for us to try to see real trends, I think, is very powerful, and we don't do as much of it, is to look outside the US. But we always assume that we're really good. We are very good in certain things. We're really at the frontier, sometimes of innovation, of research, but we're not at the frontier of adoption by any means. And the reason we're not on the frontier of adoption is because we actually have a developed society. We have good infrastructure. We had really good landlines, so we were very late in adopting mobile phones. Why? Because we had really good landlines everywhere. Well, the first country in the world to achieve 90% mobile phone penetration was Lebanon. Why? Because they were coming out of a civil war in the 80s. So they had no infrastructure for phones. And so when cell phones came about, it actually solved a real problem for them. Right. You see that obviously was and people, we're doing it now. We're looking at China for, Pinduoduo and like different mobile commerce. We looked at WhatsApp as group messaging. A lot of these things, I think people internationally start adapting them faster than us in the US. And I think that actually provides a lot of guidance to.
Yeah, there's also labor market differences that I think enable some of these internationally first. So I think something like Postmates, I think, grew up before the LATAM equivalent of Postmates, but I think the LATAM equivalent of Postmates is like a substantially more interesting business because the way the labor markets work there, it's just tons more opportunity, tons more, supply of labor to that kind of market. So I think it's just like much more transformational than it is in the US.
No, 100%. And then something like, it's funny, this is an example of a company I passed on as an investor, is Coupang, which just IPO'd.
Oh, yeah.
I was actually buddies with the founder from college.
Oh, no.
Tom Kim. And he pitched, and he came to me and said, Ramy, I'm going to start the Groupon for Korea. I'm like, we don't do Groupon clones. Well, then he went to Korea, started it, realized there was no Amazon. He was like, fuck Groupon, I just need to build Amazon. And
wow.
And they just had a massive IPO.
So how did that work really day one? Was it like, we're going to take the exact mechanics of
he took group buying. He took group buying.
Is it like nail salons and haircuts and all the same kind of categories?
He copied it as is and realized nobody cared, but that just delivering the product to people's doorsteps was what they got really excited about. And he's like, wait, they don't really have Amazon here, and this is one of the most dense countries in the world.
Yeah.
Why was there no Amazon yet established?
I don't know.
I know in search, I remember for a long time, and probably still the case, that there were enough idiosyncrasies with the Korean ecosystem that Google was never able to really gain a foothold. And there was a local search engine that was really the dominant one there. And I wonder if there was like a similar dynamic in commerce somehow, or like, why didn't Amazon win it, or why didn't the local one already emerge? Because it had already been around 10 years. Like, it was obvious that Amazon was a monster. So yeah, I'm curious when Groupon, why was Groupon sort of the model of instigation for the fact that these things didn't occur?
Yeah, I it's a really good question. I really don't know the answer, and I'm always the East Asia market is, you always talk about like what messaging apps people use in the world, and it's like in America they use SMS, in Europe, LATAM, and the Middle East they use WhatsApp, and then in China is WeChat, it's Japan it's Line, and like Korea's Kakao. It's like it's like the entire world has two, and then Japan, Korea, and China have three different ones.
Right.
Which I think also translated itself also like with Uber copycats, right? It was like Careem was all over the Middle East and like East and West Asia, but then Japan had its own, China had its own. I'm not sure why that Japan, Korea, and then China, and then Southeast Asia seems to be like four somewhat different regions with innovation.
And I guess the more that it touches the real world, maybe that's part of the thing, is the more that it touches the real world, like it's a really boots on the street kind of, it's like a turf warfare thing to make an Uber-like service work, whereas that's not the same in like a messaging or kind of a digital media kind of product offering. So I wonder if there's something there, but maybe that points to why Coupang would have been the instigator of the Amazon of Korea. I don't know.
Yeah. And it could be simply the founder. Baum had been in the US since college. He was an entrepreneur in the US, and then he decided to go back to Korea to Coupang, and perhaps there wasn't as much cross-pollination of ideas with entrepreneurs here to see what was possible.
Right. And so it sounds like when you saw it, it looked such like a Groupon clone that you were just like, obvious pass, not worth your time.
The pitch was Groupon for Korea.
Okay, yeah.
And that was the pitch.
And then did you sort of, given that you were friends with him, I guess, did you follow along, and I guess were you watching the progress from arm's length? Or
a year later I had left Coast to start Snippet.
Okay, right.
Yes, I was watching it, and then I was like, oh, that would have been nice.
It's amazing how these things.
Well, it's also a classic. Like we back entrepreneurs, not ideas.
Yeah.
When you have a very strong team.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Are you still kind of that mindset that it's? Because I think some people take the market like great people in a terrible market, the market's going to win. It's kind of a famous pithy articulation of that. So do you still take a very people-centric approach, or do markets matter in your mind? Or
so I'm at seed, and I think true seed has to be people first, because our assessment of the markets are just off.
Yeah.
Are truly off at seed. And there's so many. So I really think one of the hardest, I think it depends what you mean by market also. I think market sizing is people always say it's easy. Every startup going through YC had between $1 and $5 billion market on their deck. It was all the same deck. Right. We're up and to the right, we're going 3x month over month, and it's an X $1 billion business. And we don't really know. So I try to not spend too much time judging the size of a market, but I do ask myself about, though, is there demand for this product within that market? Is there a burning need here for what they're trying to offer? And to the extent we prefer to not invest until actually the demand is proven. I really think the best venture returns in early stage are realized when demand has been proven, but scalability is not. In other words, I think taking product market fit risk is actually, I think risk is mispriced at the seed stage, where product market fit risk is priced. Companies with product market fit risk are priced exactly the same as companies without product market fit risk, even though they shouldn't be.
And you said kind of you want to see the demand side. So what does that look like? Are there anything, concrete terms? Is it that you see like dozens of people with a new behavior, or dozens of people with like purchase intent or consummating a transaction, or what is reasonable demand?
So
not proven scalable, but reasonable.
With enterprise, we are willing to invest pre-product, because I can hop on a call with two businesses and tell them, would you use this? And if they say, yep, here is how we would use it, generally they're correct. With consumer, what consumers say and what they do are two very different things.
Yeah.
Somebody some psychologist should articulate why is it that we're very accurate about our behavior as business people, but not as individuals. And so with consumer, we need, if I don't see thousands of people and really good retention and whatnot, we're not going to invest. With enterprise, no, I can hop in a call with three businesses and they say, we all want this and here's what we'd like to see. And the team is strong, we would back them.
So are there examples of consumer services that you've seen recently that you have gotten excited about?
Like Highlighter? So, there's a few obviously that we invested in. I hate when VCs come up and like preach about their investments. Like it's not.
No, it's fine. We're just curious. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There's a company that I'm really excited about called Kite. And what Kite did, they're former Uber people, and they recognized, they were like, when I order Uber, it shows up at my doorstep. When I go rent a car, I drive to the airport and I park my car or take an Uber, and then I wait in line and then I get a car, and like the whole thing takes an hour and a half.
Yep.
Why? Why can't I just rent a car and have it show up at my doorsteps? And that's what they've built. And people love it. And it's such a simple idea. And what's hilarious is that the car rental market is littered with dead bodies.
Right.
And so it was a very hard round, because all of the VCs I know are like, oh my God, Ramy, have you not heard of Turo? Have you not heard of Sidecar? Have you not heard of...
Right.
What's the other one that's everywhere in the city? Zipcar?
Yeah.
It's just brutal. But their approach was very different. They're like, we want to make car rental delightful. Not because you're getting a Ferrari, but because you're getting a car that shows up at your doorsteps. And it has
this is super cool. So let me just understand, is it do they have their own fleet the way like a Hertz or like an Alamo might have, and then they're bringing the fleet to your doorstep, or is it like at a peer-to-peer supply system, or how does that work?
No, they don't do peer-to-peer. So peer-to-peer is very tricky. They do professional fleets and by working with car rental companies.
Perfect.
Now.
Yeah, what I love about this is this behavior is so obvious. You see it in like anybody I know, even people who live in San Francisco. And San Francisco is like, reasonably like carless possible, but it's not like perfect for that, because you often want a car to go out to Marin Headlands or go down to Santa Cruz. Like you want it for these like dates, or go to Napa, right? You want it for like a weekend trip. And but the system is so broken, it's so backwards that you have to like show up. I have to take like an Uber to the airport if I want to rent a car. That's like a $45 Uber ride to get to the airport. Whereas, the car should just show up on my doorstep. So this seems great. So when you first looked at it or met it, was it like they had a few of these things going, or they owned or leased?
I think one of the toughest thing about consumer is this was easy because I was a target customer. Mm-hmm. So before the meeting, I ordered one, and not under my name. And I was, and when it showed up and I took the car, I was like, wow, this is the closest thing to. Remember that wow factor was Uber that we had the very first time. It's funny. I went to Istanbul in 2014, and it was 3 weeks after they launched Uber. Just 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. And I was staying at a hotel. I was meeting a bunch of my friends who were from Turkey and a bunch of other people and a couple of the internationals, and we're chatting. And then we wanted to go out to a club in Istanbul. And I was like, and they're like, okay, let's go ahead and order a cab. And I was like, oh, no, wait. So I just ordered it from my phone. And they'd never seen Uber before. Mm-hmm. And literally, I was so lucky. It was a massive car. I think it was a GMC or something. And it was, there were 6 of us. I ordered the Uber XL. Yeah. So the car just showed up right outside 4 minutes later. So I'm like, okay, there's a car outside. We go outside, and this guy looks at me and goes, Mr. Adeeb. And they look at me, and they're like, who is this guy? Right? And I say, yeah. And then, he opens it when we get in. They're like, it's so hilarious because, and then he drops us at the club. Everybody starts to pull out cash to pay. And he looks at me and is like, oh, no, Mr. Adeeb paid for it already. Right. And we get off, and they're like, who are you? Are you a royalty? And I'm like, no, this is just this is accessible to all of you. And this whole thing was like $9.30. Right. But that magic of the first experience, I hadn't felt it in years. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I tried the kite and I felt it. Yeah. And to me, that was a strong enough impetus to invest. The challenge, though, as consumer is most of the time VCs are not the target consumer. Right. I remember seeing Pinterest at Khosla, and this is 5 guys. Yeah. To me, it was fascinating. I really liked the product, but we actually had to ask I remember there's a lot of women partners there now. But back then there were, and this is in 2010. So actually, we asked the admin to use it, and then the next day I walked in to the office. I never forget this. And the moment she walked me in, she immediately alt-tabbed out of Pinterest. To hide the fact that she was paying to look like she's working. And I was like, no, wait, were you? This is like, I had some free time. Like, tell me, and she was like, oh my god, I love this thing, it's amazing. And I was like, no, please keep using it. That's the whole point. Where you're actually helping. That's more useful for our job than you scheduling meetings right now. Yeah, but we were not the target demographic, and we couldn't relate to it. And so I think one of the challenges sometimes as consumers, when you're not target demographic, how can you find somebody who's a target demographic? And then have them share with you how much they love the product. Right. And it's not solved, by the way, with diversity and inclusion, candidly, because most of the time the people who are bringing the VC, whether they are different race or ethnicity or color or gender, they're all Harvard, Stanford, upper middle class. Yeah. Which is, the gender example was definitely a big gap that we have fixed, but the socioeconomic one is the toughest one. How do you understand the product that is important to people who don't make $100,000 a year?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that when you were talking about, the thought bubbles that exist in Silicon Valley. And since you personally put so much of an emphasis on trying to get outside of that, what are the kinds of people who you feel like or belief systems or whatever you feel like you interact with the least? And what's been your approach to trying to touch them more, whether it's across class or political belief or whatever that might be?
So I've been trying to watch Fox News. A lot, actually. Yeah. Just online, not watch or read. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just to get a better understanding. It's actually not that crazy. Huffington Post and Fox News, I put them in the same bucket. It's not that has been one attempt. I really like reading The Economist. The Economist obviously is a very highbrow magazine, but it really talks about the world in a lot of terms, and I remember Jack Dorsey saying, "I want to move to Africa," and people are like, "You're crazy! Like, I'm going to run." I don't think you need to move to Africa, but if you just read the Africa section in The Economist every week, that will get you pretty far to understand what's happening in that part of the world. I think, and just surrounding yourself with curious people.
Yeah, totally. Are there like people on Twitter or kind of individuals that you particularly respect who are either like really good at taking in different ideas and not following like these groupthink lines, or are particularly good spokespeople for like the other side that Silicon Valley doesn't really interact with?
So I don't like Twitter because it's too much about what's happening right here, right now. And sometimes I feel like the most important, like, I prefer current affairs as opposed to real-time news. And there's a delta between the two. Twitter is truly like, what's the latest?
Yeah.
And I care more about what's happening. So I prefer reading like The Information or The Economist or Us Weekly or Vanity Fair over just hearing the latest tweet. And I'm old school, I guess, and old age-wise.
It makes kind of sense, though. I feel like there is a little bit of a movement towards that with the people writing kind of very thoughtful weekly Substack deep dive types things, where like those are people who would be tweeting otherwise, and you wouldn't really get the depth of thinking that you get now with them. But I mean, kind of you're like curating the internet idea, right?
And I think we should remember that while on the one hand technology is moving very rapidly, like some of the best ideas from philosophy are about 5,000 years old.
Yeah.
So there is I think it's a misnomer that the most relevant ideas are the more recent ones. Right. I think the most current ideas are recent. I think the most relevant are a little bit older, and it's hard to resurface them.
Yeah, they stood the test of time, and they still exist. They sort of have gone through that Darwinian process.
Yeah, we should start like, you know how when you traditional magazine, a traditional bookstore has what they call the front list and the back list, right? So front list is like new releases, and backlist is like the books that people, and the backlist has very consistent demand. Like a Shakespeare book is like ordered X number times per year. Somebody's reading Kafka, somebody is reading.
So is the backlist just assembled based on what the ordering patterns are?
I think it's 3 years old or something. I don't know what the backlist is, or like 5 years old. There's an age for which everything is a backlist, and it's about half book sales are backlisted actually. But I feel like we need to do the same for the internet. Like a website where you can only share articles that are more than 3 years old. Like you can't share you can't write for it. You can't share new ideas.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that would be very refreshing, so that we can actually truly surface the best as opposed to the most recent.
Right. I wonder if we could is there like a filter on top of Twitter where we could, almost take things, basically show me a feed of only links that were from, items linked to 3 years ago. So we sort of have like a curation layer on top of it, but it removes the real-time nature that I think is what you're pointing out is, sometimes problematic.
We just sent our monthly newsletter. We sent a monthly newsletter to our investors, and we typically write articles. We typically include like 5 articles from the month, but this month we started investing from Fund 2, so I wanted to share some of the more interesting articles that I read about venture capital. And I picked 5 articles. There was an article from Bill Gurley from 2014 called On Bubbles that is super relevant because we are kind of in a bubble now. But nobody's writing about a bubble now. People are like, are we in a bubble? We're not in a bubble. But like, how about just a deep analysis of bubbles? It happens to be 7 years old. It's a really good article.
Yeah.
There's another article from Andy Ratcliffe from like 8 years ago about like the economics of venture capital that is just still super relevant. And how you need to be right, but you need to also be non-consensus. Because if you're right on consensus, it's arbitraged away. The profits are arbitraged away. Yeah. And it just hit me that, we need part of the group think, I think, is for us to also refrain from the most recent.
Right. Yeah. are there areas? So I think there's like paths to find the old, things that are 3 years old or older. So there's probably paths that we could design to create those. But I think there's also a lot of value we get out of like the people we interact with and the discussions that we have. And so are there places that you've found, maybe it's like private Slack communities or the comment section of a Substack, but are there places you've found where you can find people who are willing to engage in kind of the older ideas or kind of like a slower pace of kind of the, surfacing of new stuff? Does that kind of thing exist right now?
I don't think it does. I'm not familiar with one. And it was part of the vision for Snippet, but we never really realized it through.
Right. So actually, that's a nice transition. Let's actually talk about Snippet, because we have like, thousands of questions about about Snippet. I think do you want to, maybe you can set us up with a little bit of the, what it was, what context it lived, kind of what you learned, and then we can kind of dive off from there. Because there's a lot of the topics that I think I have a lot of context because we spent a lot of time around that time. But I think just to make sure that we're sort of all on the same page about like what it was, and then I think there's a lot of modern topics that are relevant to
what
it.
would be today's instantiation of this?
Yeah, no, absolutely, because the world has changed a lot since then.
Yeah,
so in 2011, folks in the US were not sharing articles on Facebook. Like that pattern. So articles, as in like sharing an article, was a conversation and people having conversation about it. The whole fake news, people weren't really sharing news on Facebook. It was still pictures and status updates to your family and community related posts. But when the Arab Spring started, and this is again another example where there was such political dissent in the Middle East that you couldn't voice your politics in public, people they found in Facebook an escape to express themselves politically. So they started sharing a ton of articles on Facebook. The problem is Facebook wasn't at all, the Facebook news feed was so not optimized for articles back then. It's way better optimized now. So you posted an article, it just, back then Facebook news feed, basically whatever you posted showed up to everybody else, like who followed you. So my friends, asked me, Ramy, what's happening in Egypt? So I started sharing articles about Egypt on Facebook, the same way people in the Middle East were sharing articles. But quickly, my entire feed was like, Egypt. And my friends, once they knew my family were okay, didn't want to hear about Egypt anymore. And it hit me that we need like a social network where people can share articles, but then others could discover it based on interest, which is what Facebook has evolved to become in a very siloed manner. And so we started the company, and the idea was you could snip anything over the web, similar to the way you could pin on Pinterest, but you would snip an article and it's immediately show up to a collection. And instead of this was probably one product iteration that I think was a mistake. We didn't, because I really believe people have very different interests, and I wanted to promote I didn't want people to just talk about tech and whatnot. So you created a collection. So as a Ramy, I created different collections or different groups, simply like boards. But one was for politics, one was for tech, one was for movies I like, one was for like social issues. The idea was to show the more multifaceted, bring out the more multifaceted aspect of individuals online.
Right.
Yeah.
That was really, really cool because people were very proud of their collections. I think what we did a mistake with is we had people follow collections, not people. So I couldn't follow David. I still followed David's collection on tech or David's collection. That was just too hard. We should just have had David only curate into collections, but people would follow David. So anyways, the following, it's a little bit interesting model. Like I want to be in a world where, sure, if you're Elon Musk, you can talk about art and culture and people will follow you. But if you're Mishti and you're both into, you probably want to talk about tech, you want to talk about entrepreneurship, you want to talk about Oahu North Shore, and you want to talk about surfing. How can I encourage you to talk about surfing? So it was a very interesting, and I think that sort of pattern still exists today. That I'm sure, Mishti, like you have a particular voice on Pinterest that is different than your voice on Twitter, that is different than your voice on Facebook.
Yeah, we were just talking about this with someone else. Like our identities online are very fragmented. The way that you even express yourself on these different platforms is very different, even the language that you use. And there isn't quite like a home base as such for like actually a person online. And we've been talking about that concept a lot. Like, is it going to be the link in bio companies, or are people going to start repurposing like Twitter or something? Like, is one platform going to grow into sort of this holistic slice of someone? Not sure.
Yeah, no, and so that was a big part of the vision.
Yeah.
And learned a ton. We grew out to, we had probably a few 100,000 users at one point at the height, and that's when we got acquired by Yahoo. It was impossible to monetize. Oh my god! Like, we were sending traffic to the New York Times, but like the New York Times hadn't figured out monetization at the time. They were not willing to pay for traffic.
Right.
So we were, and I think in retrospect, the initial community was very highbrow, and I think that was a mistake. It's actually one thing that I find encouraging about Clubhouse. I think Clubhouse is obviously hype. Like, it shouldn't be $5 billion, but that's a different story. But like, I am encouraged to see that Clubhouse is actually gaining communities that are not techies, that are international, that are African American. There is a real, and we had communities that were all over the place, but they were all left of center social topics that they were talking about.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think we needed more. It's funny because some people were using it to like share nail art the same way at Pinterest, but we were encouraging like content more.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's a very tough balance.
Right.
Act.
Do you feel like, given what you learned building Snippet, do you feel like you have maybe an eye for other platforms or where they might be going right or wrong? Like, I think about all of the categories of like knowledge management and note-taking apps are all relevant. So things like Rome Research and Notion, and I think Mem was just announced this week. So, there's like, as a category, there's a lot of excitement around this stuff, and it's not quite the same mechanics as Snippet, but I think vision-wise, it attempts to fill some similar spaces. So I don't know if you've sort of spent a lot of time with those tools, or kind of what your thoughts are.
It's funny because we had a lot of push from some of our users to pivot to become Substack, and we didn't act on it. So a few of our users were like, "This is great, Ramy, but why can't I just want to use this to collect and then email these articles to people who follow me, but over email?"
Yep.
And we're like, we don't want to build an email newsletter website. We really want to build it as a platform for people to go live and discover content.
Right.
In reality, it doesn't really matter. But it wasn't what we were started to do. But we had, remember, like a couple of our users, like, Ramy, can you help me like collect these in private? We're like, we don't have private collection. Like, well, I want to collect them somewhere, and then I want to just like blast them to a particular set of people. It was exactly kind of like the requirements for Substack.
Right.
And we didn't embrace that. So I actually think that that's a very powerful and compelling need. And I do believe it fills a gap. Notion, I don't know what Notion is really. It's like, as in, Notion is a powerful tool set, but it's part Wikipedia, part Google Doc, part Dropbox paper. So doesn't quite occupy in my mind a very clear sort of singular purpose.
Right.
Yeah.
What do you guys like?
I guess we talk a little bit about Rome more in this context, where it's like, if you could have public Romes where people are like interlinking across ideas across people, or maybe I go to like DK's Rome and I see what he has curated or what he's been taking notes on from the internet. It's a little bit more of the like people curation layer of the internet than I feel like Notion feels like right now. But I don't think Rome is totally, I mean, I should use it more and explore it more, but it doesn't feel that social right now.
I think there's like a lot of the Rome use cases initially couched as like this journaling kind of single player mode. And I think there is a lot of public Rome kind of collaboration, which is, I think to me the most interesting part. But I haven't found a way, outside of like really trying to find them by searching subreddits and stuff, I haven't found a way to like naturally engage with the product and end up at those places. That might partially be by design. Maybe they don't want me in rooms that I'm not otherwise like organically connected to. But to me, that's like the most interesting part of Rome, and I haven't found the right kind of onboard paths to those experiences. So I'm quite intrigued, but I wouldn't say I fully get it yet. And I'm still kind of an Apple Notes person. It's available everywhere. I think this is one of the things I'm excited to try Mem, because I think Mem, takes some of the cues from Apple Notes, which is just like, doesn't have to be journal, doesn't have to be day, it's on every surface. You open it, you type something, that's it, and you can do something later with it. That idea is, that's what I just organically end up doing. I'm not a huge note taking, systems person. I kind of do things as they seem like I need a tool to help with something, but I don't have it very systematized.
Yeah, I'm reading that we just shared. Mishti is pretty cool.
Oh, the old blogs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Your comment about Twitter, but you can only post things from 3 years ago. Maybe think of that. I'm sure there's such a wealth of stuff here. It's funny. I feel like I don't know if everyone feels like this, but we definitely talk a lot about like the curation layer of the internet and how to find good things to read and good people. And like you could curate everything, but then it's like, how much consumption time do people have left after like work and life and talking about curation to actually read the thing? I mean, there's so much here, and I feel like it would just take me so long to go through it. So it's just almost like this incessant rush where it reminded me of your comment before, like, do we actually need social contracts? Like, I don't know, how much do we need this curation versus we think it's cool, but people wouldn't actually consume it?
No, absolutely. Well, I'd love to hear more your philosophies on highlighter.
Yeah, we can share a bit about that. Because it doesn't maybe look like as obviously in the idea space maybe, but it's something that we think about a lot and we talk about a lot because it is ultimately, one of the areas that I think this kind of tool can serve. So we end up talking about it a lot. The idea of a highlight is and always has been kind of a new way to, a new atomic unit for information. And so you take a look at any of these books and there's thousands of great ideas inside it. And so we built initially a highlighter, like an OCR tool for your mobile phone. You could take a photo of the page and extract an idea from the thousands inside a book. And then that becomes a unit that's shareable and discussable and kind of like it unlocks that idea and makes it, interactable in a digital format. And, that worked to some extent and people liked it. But what we found, because we were hosting these, effectively like book clubs, when we would invite an author on Zoom and bring an audience together around that author, that was really where the magic happened. There's so much energy in those sessions. And so we realized that there's just a lot of energy for that kind of thing. But we also realized that like our needs as hosts are broken. Like we want easy ways to compose the stage. Like right now, you're our featured guest, right? And when we use Zoom, we have like a grid of like, 40 faces and the featured guest is in like row 3, column 4, and people are unmuting at the wrong time. And, the whole thing just didn't help us create the video we wanted to create. So we ended up building this tool fully oriented around helping us create the exact video we want to create. And, the deeper we get, we want to publish it. And then, of course, we want to make the highlights of this video. So that same atomic unit of information idea, we might actually pull out an atomic unit of information about your story of Snippet or your story of Kite or any story. We've just explored, dozens of ideas in the last, 48 minutes, right? So that same idea, kind of in the abstract, is alive and well, but just the format that it takes is like significantly evolved.
Got it. Very cool.
Yeah.
Very, very cool.
And along with this, we realized that one of the patterns that has emerged that is not really part of the product, but part of the behaviors that we notice is we often want to read an article together. So what we do is we take the article, we paste it into Google Docs, and then we share the link for Google Docs here. Then everybody who is on the session can see and participate in the Google Doc kind of collaborative reading, note-taking, highlighting process inside Google Docs. And that one in particular has opened up our eyes to like all kinds of new possibilities too around how should something be kind of collaboratively written, or like when if you were to write in public in a way that's not as fully published, but it's more like flexible, porous, open to like further discussion or interpretation or commentary feedback. That seems like a deep need that we keep seeing again and again, both in ourselves as well as others. And so we do this a lot with Highlighter, even though it's not really like part of Highlighter. It's more just a behavior that we end up doing. But it's, obviously relevant to these topics of how is the internet curated, and, how do we find the best stuff. So maybe we can eventually carry the torch forward and serve some of the goals that you had outlined originally with Snippet, right?
Well, I mean, you are carrying it forward. I couldn't agree more. Just distilling information into the highlights that are relevant is no. There is a lot more analogies. I mean, yeah, I'm glad to see you, David, working on it, and I'm glad to see Mishti be part of it as well.
Yeah, no, it's been. I think like one thing also is that people learn so well through conversation, and if you then make the focus of these conversations that like let's learn what we can and just relax, and the best snippets will be shared afterwards, either by like they can be crowdsourced or we can make them ourselves. People are just so much more relaxed and like real during the actual sessions themselves. It's not like, oh, you're on air and this is a podcast interview, like this could go for 3 hours. Like a lot of the time DK and I just sit there in silence and we're like reading this Google Doc together. So I think a lot of like co-learning can happen without it feeling like dead time or wasted space also.
Yeah, and I think really, like, as product managers, we tend to attribute so much of the community to the features, but I think it's a lot of it is correlation more than causation. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, people are douchebags on Reddit, and they're nice and and they are just part of it is because on Reddit it is anonymous, but my name on Reddit is Ramy Adeeb. It's more like that could be a factor, but I think a bigger part of it is just that's how the community is, and now there's an expectation to behave in a certain way. And so I think just simply starting, you could end up basically with, I mean, this is a somewhat, crass example, but like it could be Instagram, and it could be a dating app, or it could be like a prostitution app. It's exactly the same feature set. It's just the people going in there have a very different mindset. And so I think there's something very powerful about you all starting effectively, I hate to use the word social network, or a space for folks to express themselves with certain sort of ideals around self-expression, around candor, around disdaining groupthink, sort of around critical thinking. And I think the world needs that.
Yeah. Cool. So we should float. I'm glad to hear that you're excited about this. We should float an idea by you that you might find, an interesting way to continue engaging with the Highlighter ecosystem. So with our lunch break, we find that we host a lot of interesting people. Could be investors, founders, writers, authors, bloggers, Substack, whatever. And one pattern that has emerged a lot is that there's a lot of early stage founders, either pre-funding or just post-funding, who haven't yet figured out exactly how to tell their story. And they're kind of still a little raw and still trying to like mold the thing into the perfect version of it. So it's not really like ready for a press moment. But there's like a process through discussion and through kind of the storytelling and roughly kind of like an interview, like tell me about the company, that helps somebody, express the actual idea, the kind of unfiltered version of it. And we found that can be really exciting for, we create great highlights of those things. We share those out on Twitter and other places. And it actually helps founders with recruiting, with additional fundraising, all kinds of, different ways somebody might want to get their story told, but it's not it's not like a TechCrunch article, or it's not something where it's on blast and polished. It's more, just this format of us talking. So one idea that we've been playing with, and I think we're going to start next week, is we're going to make a show called Building in Public. And the point of Building in Public is we take anytime we're meeting somebody, whether they've just closed a financing round, or even we've met entrepreneurs who've actually gotten funded on Lunchbreak. We would bring them to Lunchbreak and just talk to them about what they're building. And we'll have screen sharing up. We can walk through if they have like graphics or pictures. We can walk through if they're building a website or a mobile app, and we can just kind of like talk to them about what they're doing and create the highlights. And then we can share those out and help them tell their story better. So that's like the general concept, the Building in Public show. What's your reaction on that?
I love
it. Anything in particular kind of that you think would work better, or would like kind of format wise, should it be one company for an hour, or 15 minutes per company, or do you have a sense kind of just from you talk to a lot of these same kinds of companies, do you feel like you have a sense of what
or like what would you want to hear if you were listening to a founder in this context? Because I mean there's kind of like the more formal pitchy demo day things which we don't really want to adopt the vibe of, like much more interesting I think to just like treat it like a workshop, thought lab, collaborative, office hour maybe type situation where it's more conversational, kind of like what we've been doing today.
No, look, I think it's I prefer to not get pitched. I prefer to actually try, and I make an effort to have conversations with the founders about their past. I always like look at the founder on LinkedIn, try to find a shared experience, and just try to get them to talk outside of the standard pitch.
Yeah.
To me, that is very valuable. The second very valuable thing is just limit down the time a little bit. Like if you have founders can tell the story in an hour, can tell it in 2 minutes.
Right.
And to the extent that you can push them to tell it in 2 minutes, to the extent that you get a more just a bit of an essence of what really truly matters.
Right.
So I'm a big fan of sort of the brevity side of it. But these are two somewhat different use cases. One, I'm trying to make an investment. Other, I'm trying to sort of get to know the person.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to listen to it.
Yeah. I was going to say, are there any companies maybe you've recently closed financing with that you think would be like Kite, for example? Is that kind of a recent one?
I think that would be awesome to chat with them about just their experience.
We should invite them on. Yeah, we've been doing this recently too, where somebody's just finished their financing and now they're like ready to go hire and expand, and they're not ready to quite tell their story in a super formal way, but
there's a couple. There's Kite. We also, I think Kite would be phenomenal. We also just, and I apologize, I need to drop in a minute.
No worries. Yeah.
We just invested actually in a very cool company in Mexico called Therapify. What I like about it is it's two founders who built Mexico's leading mental health startup. Mm-hmm. They don't fit any of your traditional founder. They're just real people who dealt with this problem, decided to build the businesses within 3 years. They've built they never really raised capital before. They speak a bit of English, but not great English. But I think actually they would be they're just so real, and would be such a refreshing departure from your traditional Silicon Valley.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
I'd love that. Yeah.
Newer, fresher narrative would be awesome.
Yeah.
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 Well, that's great. Well, we'd love to connect to, is it Therapify?
Yeah.
We shared the link. So yeah, Therapify, if you want to mention this to them.
Yeah. I will tell them. Do you have a paragraph? Do you guys just tell them, just send me one paragraph to forward to both or either.
Yeah.
And I would love to do that.
Yeah. Great.
Awesome.
Well, it was lovely I really enjoyed this.
Yeah. Me too.
It was fun.
I'm so glad we got the chance to catch up and you two got connected, and great.
Yeah.
All right. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Ramy.
Take care. Thanks, David. Thanks, Mishti.
Bye.
See ya.